And we're here to do what we generally do. We don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about the most important thing in the world. The most important thing in the world. We talk about a lot and important, but the most important thing in the world is the will of our Maker. It comes to us in two volumes. Two volumes. The laws of nature, unwritten, and the nature of creation, and the laws of nature's God, written in the Bible, lex scripta. The laws of nature's God, unwritten, that's our common law. A solid stepping stone in the history of our common law is called the Constitution of the United States. Taking a brief and a small slice of our common law as it applies to government, not as it applies to us, as it applies to government, and put it on paper. What's on paper with our Constitution of the United States is the unwritten Constitution of England in fundamental form. It is the unwritten Constitution of England. What's the unwritten Constitution of England? Our common law. That's what we have in America. Well, that being true, let's look at that slice of our common law. We're going through the Catechism on the Constitution of the United States. Arthur J. Stansbury, published 1828. We're ready for question 264 out of 333 questions. By the way, when we get this done, Miss Francine, I'm always thinking ahead, something else to do. You'd mentioned this a while back. I'd sat down with my mother and father, probably closer to 30 hours than 20, and interviewed them. My father's now 99, my mother's 80 or 94. I interviewed them and I asked them questions, thinking that they probably at this point wouldn't be afraid to speak. I wanted to know what they thought and what their answers were, and I plumbed into the depths of their understanding, and I wrote all those down, and they signed and notarized the document. Questions and answers, questions and answers. Well, that'd be a good idea that we went over that next, just to see what somebody who's pushing 100 years old might say about the Christian life, having nothing to hide much about it at that point and wanting to say the truth and not fearing any repercussions. You see, we're talking about Charlie Kirk a while ago, and you're talking about me, or you're talking about any other famous, well, somebody in the public eye to varying degrees. There's certain things people are afraid to talk about because they're afraid they wouldn't be able to get on the public platform and they would be shut down and blackballed. And that's true. You get shut down and blackballed if you talk about certain things. Charlie Kirk was pretty young. He was 31, I believe, wasn't he, when he was murdered, and almost too soon to recognize the danger, I would say. Matter of fact, yeah, probably was too soon to recognize the danger. Shooting off your mouth, see? Maybe in a good way, but still dangerous. So we measure things. We try to keep from getting killed while we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. You have to be as wise as a serpent. How wise are serpents? Well, the serpent in the Bible is always, always signifies evil and the evil one. Are they wise? Yeah. Being evil doesn't mean your brain doesn't work. It works really well, just in the wrong direction. Wise as serpents. We're to be crafty. Crafty. Cagey. There's a good word. That's what we're to be as Christian men and women, and that takes time and experience. How does a fellow know what the right thing to do is? I'll tell you how he knows. He finds out by doing the wrong thing and suffering the consequences. That's what that boils down to. Well, let's look at this. Question number 264. Isn't that the one, or is it 263? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Miss Francine. Question: must all causes of these several kinds be begun in one of the inferior courts of the United States, or may any of them be commenced at once in the Supreme Court of the United States? I remind you, our Constitution of the United States is biblically compatible. What does that mean? Well, it's our common law tradition, and it's just put to right what men have discovered over the centuries about the relationship between men and government, and between those in government. And our common law tradition has three co-equal branches of government, with none of those branches having authority or power to do away with the other one. Creates a three-way Mexican standoff. Says here, there are two kinds of courts. This question talks about the inferior courts of the United States, not of the states. The states have their own sovereign court system, each one of them. The general government in the District of Columbia, 10 miles square, has a sovereign court system. To that sovereign government, what's sovereignty? Let's talk about that in just a minute. Different ways you can define it. Most times, the best way to do that is just cite some of the characteristics of sovereignty. Some of the characteristics of sovereignty. A sovereign is a government or a person who doesn't answer to anybody. Now, who in this created universe doesn't answer to anybody? God, the man that created the universe, the heavens and the earth and all that in them is, doesn't answer to nobody, no way, no time, ever. The Bible says he sitteth in the skies, in the heavens, and does whatsoever pleases him. That's a quote. He sits in the heavens and he does whatsoever pleases him. Doesn't please him, he doesn't do it. He's not out to please anybody else. He's self-sufficient, self-glorifying. Did you ever wonder really why they murdered Jesus Christ? He gave all glory to himself. Read the gospel records, and you feel the spirit of it coming through. Not only did he do that, he did it in such a way that seemed humble. It's odd. It's supernatural. How else can you get that? But the people that wanted all the glory weren't going to stand for it, so they murdered him. That's what they did. Of course, he came for that reason. He came to incite murder against himself and make sure it happened. That's why he came, and he said so, and he did it. He did those things, the things he said to incite murder. He didn't come for any other reason. He came to be the sacrifice for the sins of his people. And the nation, his people, sacrificed him for the wrong reasons, but they did exactly what God said they would do. Because God sits in the heavens and he does whatsoever pleases him, and he makes sure that everything happens and what he wants to happen, for good or ill. In his sovereignty, he makes it all work together for good for his people. The murder of Charlie Kirk. We prayed this morning. Lord, and I want to pray this way. This has gotten out of hand. It's a worldwide phenomenon. Please use this event, and I know you will. So I'm praying in your will. Use this for your glory and our benefit. I'm praying don't let the evil empire use it for their glory and their benefit, which they're trying to do. There's no other reason to kill somebody like that unless you can use them after they're dead. A lot of famous people have been killed so that it will accrue to the benefit of those that did the killing. Did you know it's against the law at common law in the United States, we're a common law country, to murder your parents so you can get the inheritance? Now, I know that sounds funny, but let's just talk about the obvious here. Sure, you can murder your parents, and you may go to prison for life or be executed, but you're not going to get the inheritance. See, you know, the Jewish people talk about chutzpah. Chutzpah, have you heard that? Chutzpah. That's a perversion of a Hebrew word. And they can't define it really, but they illustrate it. They illustrate it in their writings, like the Mishnah, the Talmud. Chutzpah, said one rabbi, is murdering your parents and then arguing in court for mercy because you're an orphan. Chutzpah. You see what it is? But you don't get mercy because you're an orphan. You did away with that. But that's the kind of thing that happens constantly. Very creative, the way the evil empire gets. Well, 264, answer. Oh, inferior courts. I wanted to make this point. There are two kinds of courts. Oh, I talked about sovereignty. A sovereign doesn't answer to anybody for what he does. God is the sovereign of the universe, but God has delegated what we call earthly sovereignty to nations down here on land. Well, what does that mean? That means a sovereign nation down here on land doesn't answer to any other nation for what they do. And if any other nation wants to challenge them for what they do, there will be war. When the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor, as a sovereign nation, they bombed Pearl Harbor. They were a sovereign nation. We said, wait a minute, you may be a sovereign nation. We're going to challenge you for what you did. And what was their response as a sovereign? All out, total, no holds bar war. And they were brutal. They were like demons come forth from hell. They didn't sign on to the Geneva Convention. There was nothing as a matter of law to restrain them from raping, plundering, murdering, torturing. And they did all that stuff in spades. They were brutal. People talk about, why is it people focus so much on the Nazis and how nasty they were? Those fellows looked like Girl Scouts compared to the Japs. Oh no, no kidding. Why is it that all of the vinegar and the hatred are focused on the German people? It shouldn't be. Did they do wrong things? Yeah, they did wrong things. We have records of wrong things they did. And they were pretty bad. But as I said, in comparison to the Japs, they looked like Girl Scouts. Wimpettes, the level of their brutality. Lawlessness is lawlessness. I'm not excusing the Germans at all. They went about things the wrong way in a lot of ways. Not to mention taking an oath to a mere mortal like Adolf Hitler to die for him. God's not going to tolerate that from the start. Of course, the Japs did the same thing, but they were more upfront about it. Well, that's what a sovereign is. A sovereign down here on land, as God has delegated sovereignty, and it's a limited sovereignty down here on land. The nations down here on land don't answer if they're sovereign to any other nation. They don't have to. And if the other nation doesn't like it, they can go to war. When we put our flag up on our ships on the high seas, that is, by definition, an act of belligerence. A battle flag is an act of belligerence. belligerence. A battle flag says, "Here I am. You're feeling froggy? Jump." That's what that says. Even a flag on a merchant ship is saying, "Hey, you're feeling froggy? I'm flying the flag of the United States. Jump on over here. I got something for you." The United States will come, the Navy will come and annihilate you. You're flying the flag of Britain or of Norway, same thing. They're responsible to vindicate offenses against their nation. That's sovereignty. It says here also that the sovereign here in the United States has a superior court and inferior courts under them. Inferior, that doesn't mean they're inferior in importance. That means that they're inferior because they're not the court of last resort. The Supreme Court of the United States is the court of last resort as to our general government in Washington, D.C. Your state Supreme Court is the Supreme Court of last resort in your state. Unless the issue that your state Supreme Court decided is a constitutional question. Because the Supreme Court of the United States has jurisdiction over questions, remember, very narrow jurisdiction over questions arising under our Constitution of the United States. So if you get all done in state court and you get to the Supreme Court of your state and your state denies your position, if it's a constitutional question, if it's a question that arises under the Constitution of the United States, you can appeal that state Supreme Court decision to the Supreme Court of the United States. I think I told you, for a short time, I felt I finished a friend's term of office as county prosecutor in a small rural county. And during that time, a case from that county went to the United States Supreme Court. It was a state case, went to the state courts. The fellow's name was Armstrong. He lost at the state court level, at the trial court level. He lost at the appellate court level, the state appellate court level. He lost at the state Supreme Court level. So he appealed from there because it was a constitutional question. It was a question about protection from unlawful search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. He appealed to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court took the case and decided it. Well, these inferior courts, remember, in the federal government are under the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm repeating for emphasis. Our Constitution of the United States only establishes one court. One court. What is that court? The Supreme Court of the United States. And then our Constitution delegates authority to the Congress of the United States to establish other courts inferior. That means in the chain of appeal. Not that they're inferior in purpose or importance, but they're inferior just in this sense. You can appeal from them to the Supreme Court of the United States. A Congress has established appellate districts under the Supreme Court. I believe there are 11. Is that right? You can look it up. I've just dealt with 11, so I remember 11. Maybe there are 13. I think it's 11, though. You can look. I've worked on cases in the 8th Circuit. That's Missouri. The 7th Circuit. That's Illinois and Indiana. The 11th Circuit, I believe that's down in Florida. The 2nd Circuit, that's New York and other states around there. And then last but not least, the 10th Circuit, that's Colorado and other states around it. And then the Ninth Circuit. I worked in that one quite a bit. The Ninth Circuit. That's California, the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Washington. I've mentioned that. So the Congress has established trial courts under the Supreme Court of the United States. And then above that, federal appellate courts, like I was talking about, the Seventh Circuit, the 10th Circuit, the Second Circuit, the 11th Circuit, the Ninth Circuit, the Eighth Circuit. And then established trial courts where they have jury trials under that, under the appellate courts. Those are called the federal inferior courts. Answer: all cases which have to do with ambassadors to the United States, public ministers and councils, and all those in which one of the states is a party may be begun in the Supreme Court of the United States. You don't go to an inferior court, a trial court, an appellate court. No, cases like this, our Constitution of the United States says that the Supreme Court of the United States has what's called original jurisdiction. That's where the case has its origin. You go straight to the Supreme Court of the United States. And if any case is brought that having to do with ambassadors, public ministers to other countries, councils from other countries to here, if they do go to a state court, somebody, one of the parties, has a right to just remove it to the Supreme Court of the United States. Question 165, how are judges of the courts of the United States appointed? Answer: by the President of the United States, with the advice and consent of the Senate of the United States. Miss Francine, next time we'll start with 166. That's what I meant. That's why you're here. See, Miss Francine probably made good grades in algebra and trigonometry and stuff like that. She knows how to do addition, subtraction. Is that true, Miss Francine? Oh, okay. You got pretty good at it. And you know your multiplication tables. Yeah, we were supposed to learn through 12 times 12, and I didn't do good in a lot of things, but I got those babies down cold. Multiplication tables. But I'm joking about counting. Miss Francine, I figure she does this kind of stuff, and she'd worked in it all her life. And of course, if you're in business, you got to book the numbers, or you're not going to make it. You got to know if your income exceeds your income is supposed to exceed your outgo. Because if your income doesn't exceed your outgo when you're in business, your overhead will become your downfall. And you got to put that all on paper and make sure you're doing that right. Miss Francine lived for years with her husband, and they did that.